Who's that? Oh! John, can you hear us?
Yes.
Hey, all right. Okay. Now let me full screen. John, you can go ahead while we were figuring out a full screen.
All right. Great. Nice to be here, at least virtually. I have a short presentation planned, but essentially, if there's anything on any of your minds, feel free to speak up, either in between the presentation about some of the things that I think are kind of interesting that are happening, or afterwards. I think we have lots of time for your questions as well. So let me jump right in and see if I can get my presentation up. Let's see. All right. Does that work?
Yes.
All right. Fantastic. So just to briefly start off with a little bit background about me. I've been at Google for pretty much 10 years now. Wow. Time flies. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst at Google, which basically means we try to connect the external webmasters with Google engineers. Where in the beginning, it was always a bit that the engineers were working on search and doing their thing to try to make things as best as possible. But they tended not to speak with actual webmasters to see if they were doing the right things. So we're kind of trying to help solve that a little bit. If you have questions now, of course, we should have time later on to answer those. Afterwards, I also do office hours hangouts. I'm on Twitter. A couple of us are on Twitter, or even on Google+. I thought it would be interesting to kind of show how we work internally as well, to give you all a little bit of an overview of where we stick. So basically, we're the WTA, the Webmaster Trends Analyst team here in the middle, between webmasters, websites, site owners, publishers, like all of you. And on the other side, we have, on the one hand, the search features teams, which are basically anything that is shown in the search results. That could be something like the titles or the snippets. It could be rich snippets. It could be rich cards, any of the fancy newer stuff there. Also, the infrastructure team, which is basically anything that's involved with actually getting content from websites and making it available in our index. So that's like Googlebot, like understanding crawling and indexing and understanding how duplicates work, all of that. And then, of course, we have the Search Console team, which tries to create tools to make it a little bit easier for you to do things in search. And there are other people within Google who are really interested in search as well, but we try not to talk to them too much. So on the one hand, there are actually SEOs at Google that do a pretty good job, as far as I can tell, that we've talked to in the past, but we try to keep a nice barrier from them so that we make sure that they don't have any kind of inherent advantage over normal external SEOs. So this is something that's kind of frustrating for the Google SEOs, because when they come to us with like a question like, how do I set up canonicals on these pages, we're usually, well, maybe you should ask in our help forum or join our live Hangouts, which obviously they try to kind of like get a quick answer anyway. And on the other hand, we have the ad side, the sales side, everyone that's kind of involved with buying ads through Google, or as a publisher that's showing Google ads on their website. And these folks sometimes come to us as well and say, oh, I have this really important client, and they have this problem in search, and maybe you can give them like a tip or a bit of help so that they remain a client on our side. And from our point of view, that's also something that we wouldn't do. We really want to make sure that we treat all webmasters the same, regardless of whether or not they're clients or not. So if it's a really big and important website for our sales team, we'll still send them to the help forum, or we'll still say they need to join our public Hangouts to get advice. And this kind of barrier between the other teams that are interested in search is really important for us. So what also happens because of this barrier sometimes is that we will work on something and announce something, and the other teams won't actually know about that because it's just we're trying to keep them at the same level of information as we would normal external webmasters as well, so that you don't have any kind of disadvantage when it comes to like being visible in the search results. Some of the recent things we've been working on together with the various teams here is everything around mobile, which I think is a fascinating topic. There's lots of stuff happening there. It feels like it was just recently that we did the mobile-friendly initiatives to try to encourage more sites to go mobile-friendly. Now a big topic that's coming up is mobile-first indexing. So I have a bit on that. Then there are things like AMP, accelerated mobile pages, which is a great way to make really fast mobile sites. Progressive web apps, which is a way you can make a mobile site kind of act like a native app on a mobile device. HTTPS is really important for us. Structured data. Some things that we kind of help with on the side are the faster search algorithms like Penguin and Panda to make them more real-time. And a topic that's more kind of on the technical side, thinking around getting JavaScript sites into the search results to make it easy for them to use these JavaScript frameworks that are out there to make really fast and interactive sites that still work well in search. So that's something that is really important for us because there are lots of neat things you can do with these JavaScript frameworks. And in the past, it has been really hard to get them to work in search. So let me jump right into some of the topics. HTTPS is something that we talk about quite a lot. There's a slight change in the search results for HTTPS. So that's something that's sometimes encouraging, but there are also lots of features that are available only for HTTPS. And to some extent, HTTPS makes your site even faster if you do things like HTTP2 as well. Moving to HTTPS is, for most sites, non-issue once they have content available on HTTPS. So setting up a redirect is no problem. It gets trickier when you start doing more than just a move to HTTPS. So when you change the URL structure, you change like the file ending or the folder name. It gets even harder when you start merging and splitting sites. Because then it's not taking all of the information we have and just moving it to HTTPS. It's really a matter of us trying to really understand everything about these websites to figure out like what should the new standard be. hreflang is another topic that we see a lot of questions about, especially internationally. So if you have international sites in multiple languages, this is definitely something to look into. And what I find interesting about this is it's essentially one of those traditional technical SEO things where you have to understand canonicalization. You have to understand how URLs are indexed on Google's site, how meta tags work, how to create pages that have a clean head section on the page. It's not something where you have to do any kind of fancy SEO black magic. It's really a pure technical thing, which means it's sometimes also really tricky to get right, because there are lots of ways you can break technical things like this. So I have a brief information on how you could set this up. I'll just jump through this briefly. I believe this is being recorded as a video, so if you're watching this and you want to take a look at this, feel free to just kind of pause the video and look at this a bit later. So essentially, you'd add the hreflang links for the different languages and country versions between the pages, and we would swap that out in the search results. If you have something fancy on your site that does redirection, that has a country or language picker, then there's a way to do that with hreflang xdefault as well. It's important to kind of make sure that the individual language versions don't do a redirect. So you could have kind of a main page that does a redirect, but the individual language version shouldn't do the redirect, because otherwise Googlebot would only see that final redirect version that's maybe shown to users in the US, which means we might miss out on your localized content. Additionally, instead of just doing a redirect, we also kind of want to avoid that you set up an interstitial on those pages. Because if you have an interstitial there and Googlebot crawls those pages and sees that interstitial, then we might end up indexing that interstitial instead of your normal content, which is probably not what you want. A topic that comes up quite a bit within individual countries as well. So even if you don't have localized content, you might have regional content. So you might have something where people go to your homepage, and depending on the state or the city that they're in, they might see something kind of localized to them. And that's, from my point of view, that's perfectly fine. It's just important for you to keep in mind that Googlebot crawls from California for the most part. So if there's anything on your site that you need to have indexed, make sure it's kind of in the generic part of your pages, and not that you're swapping out the whole content for the localized, personalized content. Otherwise, what will happen is Googlebot will probably just index the Californian content and won't show your local, maybe Minnesotan content if you're providing something unique there. Also, Googlebot doesn't crawl logged in, so it doesn't keep cookies of the state. And if you're doing something really fancy with redirects, make sure that Googlebot is still able to access the individual language versions, and that you have some kind of a safe fallback so that if Googlebot goes to the wrong version, or if users go to the wrong version, they don't get blocked, but rather they get a banner on top that kind of subtly guides them to the right version. A kind of a side note that I think we recently noticed is, of course, DMOZ went away. So that's something that some of you might remember, the early days of trying to get your site listed in the DMOZ, and making sure that the title and the description that was shown there is correct and accurate, and trying to find an editor that's actually live in some of these sections so that you can get listed. They've closed down in the meantime. We use them quite a bit for descriptions in the search results. So if you search for something and we don't have a good description on your pages, we've often gone to DMOZ and used the description from there, or part of the description from there. And with them gone, it's really important that you have clean titles and descriptions on your pages. So that's one thing to kind of watch out for there. It seems like old school SEO, and we of course say that descriptions aren't a ranking factor, but they are shown in the search results. So if you want to make sure that your site is presented well in search, then make sure that the descriptions of your individual pages are actually pretty good. So one thing you could do is go to Search Console and look at the top pages for your site and just double check those pages and make sure they have good descriptions and good titles on them. For mobile-friendly, let's see. Some of the things that are kind of interesting to look at here are some of the speed testing tools, the usability testing tools, the Lighthouse extension. If you haven't seen that, I give that a shot. Technically, the Lighthouse extension is for progressive web apps to test those. But you can also test your normal mobile pages, and you get a lot of information about those there. For mobile-friendly indexing, I think that'll be an interesting topic for this year. One of the important parts here to keep in mind is that one of the guiding things that we do is to try to make it such that websites don't have to do everything. So if there's a way for us to get the information from pages without websites having to do that, we'll try to get that to work. This is one of the reasons why we're really reluctant to add new meta tags, because we know what a hassle it is to have to jump in and figure out how to add meta tags to pages. So instead of that, we'd ideally have it such that you don't have to make changes to your website. So we're looking into ways that we can kind of switch to mobile-first index without sites having to do a lot of work. I suspect some sites will still have work. So especially if you have an m. site, so separate mobile URLs, then that's something where it's going to get trickier, because suddenly you have your m.urls that are indexed, and they're shown as the canonical version. But you might also have the desktop version, the desktop URLs available as well. So if you want to prepare for the mobile-friendly indexing, then one thing you could do is think about what it would take to move from an m. site to either a responsive site or a dynamic serving site where you have the same URLs for all versions of your content. When you're looking at the SEO aspect of mobile-friendly indexing, one of the things we're still working on is like what exactly we need sites to do. But these elements are things that I think are relevant regardless of any mobile-first indexing from our side. So make sure that your pages on mobile have the full content and full functionality as your desktop pages. Essentially, that's kind of what it boils down to. So if you have something like a view as desktop link that you show to mobile users, that's something I would really track with analytics to see, like, why are people using that link? What functionality are they missing on my mobile page that I need to be providing? Because lots of users are using mobile as their primary internet device nowadays. So you really need to make sure that you're not making assumptions that mobile users don't care about images, or mobile users don't care about buying stuff from my website. Essentially, if you're making it hard for mobile users to use your website, then of course they're not going to do that much on your site. But these are things that are important to kind of watch out for. JavaScript sites is another big topic. I talked about that briefly in the beginning. It kind of comes down to the old school SEO advice. You need URLs on your site. We need to be able to have separate URLs for your content. And we need to have internal links so that we can crawl your site. And everything else, more or less, to a large extent, kind of falls into place because we can process JavaScript to a large part like a normal browser can. It's not completely perfect yet, so I would double check that with fetch and render in Search Console. But we're getting pretty good. And finally, I think this is the last one. Yes. Search Console is something that I think is really important. If you're not using Search Console, I'd really make sure that you've set that up. Also, that you've set up access to all of the different versions of your site in Search Console, so that you get all of the information around the different versions that we might send you. All of the errors, for example, that we find when crawling these pages, and that we get all of that. If you're a bigger company, if you have multiple people working on your website, then I would use delegate access in Search Console to individual parts of your site. And consider using read-only access for consultants, people who don't need to make specific changes in Search Console. And finally, as always, make sure that you're documenting important settings and the user settings that you have set up so that you can kind of double check that from time to time. And especially if you're migrating things to a different URL structure or different URL version, it's like you're moving to HTTPS, then you can apply all of those settings to your HTTPS version as well, and you don't need to kind of guess at which parts need to be updated and changed there. All right. So with that, I think I'm pretty much done here. And let me just stop the presentation. And we can move over to questions from your side.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
OK. Can you hear us OK?
Yes.
OK, perfect. Well, so I'm going to moderate. We have some questions flowing in. So let's just jump right in. The first question is, what major or notable shifts are you seeing in search queries the past year? And how do you think it will evolve or change in the next year and beyond?
That's hard to say. So I think one interesting aspect is that we still see a significant number of queries for the first time every day. So I think we recently announced again that it's something like 10–15% of all search queries are unique that we've never seen before that reach us in search, which is something that I wouldn't expect. I'd say like at some point, people have searched for everything once before, at least. But that's still happening. One big shift that I see that I don't think like site owners need to worry about too much is that users have stopped searching keyword type queries. So when I search, or when the early web users started searching, it was always like I would give it a couple of keywords, and if I don't get an answer, I'd add another keyword to the query and try to search that way. Nowadays, a lot of people search in natural language. So when I see my kids searching, when I go to school and talk to kids about search, they're like, I search the way I would talk to a normal person, which I think is a fascinating development, and which I think is also a sign that things are working out fairly well on Google's side when I don't see them running into problems that way. When users are still finding relevant content in search, despite them searching completely differently. And I think that'll continue shifting in that direction as more shifts happen towards voice search, towards assistant, all of that. People search in very different ways, and they still expect relevant content. They still expect the same things. So it's not something where a site owner needs to add more keywords to their pages, but rather it's just like they use slightly different ways to get to your content nowadays.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. So you brought up a hot topic happening at least around our office, which is voice search. How can you kind of give us some guidance around how marketers can prepare their sites for voice search, which is obviously coming and just really spiking in usage? And then also, can we expect to see any sort of voice search query data coming through in Search Console?
Yeah, that's a question we get every now and then, and I don't really have a good answer for that. So sorry about that, but it's something where, like I mentioned, we try to understand these queries better and still bring relevant search results. So it's not so much that you need to make changes on your site for voice search, but more a matter of kind of understanding that people are searching slightly differently. And when you look at things like the queries in Search Console that are leading to your site, that are showing impressions, you might need to kind of drill down a little bit differently. But I suspect at the moment it's not such that we'd be able to kind of split those out separately and list them separately in Search Console. I suspect at some point that that might happen, that you have a filter and say by voice or by typing or something like that.
OK. I can handle that. I guess I'll just have to wait. OK, there's a internal dispute that's happening here with our MnSearch audience. Apparently, there's a debate happening. The question is, if I submit a sitemap that is on a different domain or subdomain than what the map is actually for, what happens? So, for example, the sitemap is for y.com but lives on x.com.
You can do that. Essentially, we have a process called cross-submission for sitemaps, where in certain situations, that's perfectly fine. So essentially, what we need to have is some kind of a confirmation that this sitemap file is authoritative for that website, which you can do with the robots text file. So if x.com has the robots text file that says sitemap : on y.com is my sitemap file, then for us, that's a sign, well, the webmaster of x.com is specifically saying this is an authoritative sitemap file for us. Another option is if both of those sites are verified in the same Search Console account. Then we also know, well, this is the same owner. So if y.com submits a sitemap file that has URLs from x.com, then probably there's a reason for that. So those are kind of the two ways that works. What doesn't work is if we don't have any connection between x.com or y.com, then we assume that y.com is not an authoritative source for sitemaps for x.com.
OK, dispute settled? Is that right? OK.
So the robots.txt lists a XML index file that exists on the domain.
OK.
You go to the index file, it lists it on AWS or some other website.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient enough?
OK. John, OK, you could hear that. OK.
That's fine. Yeah. So if the robots.txt file has a sitemap : and a full URL that's hosted anywhere, which could be like within the same domain, which could be on AWS, it could be somewhere completely different, it could even be a service provider that's creating these sitemap files for you, that's for us, that's fine.
Got it. OK, going a slightly different direction. Which SEO question do you wish would go away forever?
Oh, man. It's hard to say. I mean, it's easy to find questions where I'd say, oh, we've answered this like a million times. But from my point of view, getting those questions again kind of means that there are new people coming out that are actually starting with SEO, that are like starting fresh, and all of us had to start somewhere. So getting quote like stupid questions from people that we've answered a million times before, from my point of view, just says, well, this is still an interesting niche. This is still an interesting job. There are lots of interesting people that are joining this and getting started again. So from that side, I really have trouble saying, oh, like this meta tag question or this titles question or like, I don't know, domain authority or some other question is like, oh, I wish this question would go away, because it's kind of a sign that this is still an interesting job that we're doing.
OK, that's a diplomatic, safe answer. I appreciate that. OK, Eric is asking, is there a way to validate that Google is respecting our canonical URLs? And if not, how do we fix this?
Probably not. Probably not. So what you can see is if we're picking the canonical that you wanted. So what you can do is do like an info : query for the URL that you think should be canonical. And you can see which URL we're actually indexing for that specific URL. What you can't do is kind of brute force Google to use your canonical. So we use a number of different signals to pick a canonical. That includes things like redirects. It includes the rel canonical, internal links, external links. All of this kind of comes together. And based on all of these signals, we say, well, this is the URL that we will pick for this content. And it could be that you're redirecting somewhere else from there. And you're saying, oh, man, I'm redirecting. Like, why doesn't Google respect my canonical decision here? But because we have all of these other signals that say, well, actually, you're not being so clear about what you want, we might choose something different. So if you really, really want us to pick a specific URL, then make sure that all of these signals align and that we can kind of trust you and make sure that this is the right thing to do. The other thing to mention is you generally don't need to force us to use one specific URL as a canonical, because when we shift the canonicals, we shift the URL that we show in the search results. We don't shift the ranking. So it's not a matter of like us ranking something lower because it has a parameter attached to it or no parameter attached to it. It's really ranking in the same place. It's just a different URL that's being shown. And especially when you're on mobile, users have no idea what the URL is anyway. They wouldn't be able to see the URL because it's essentially hidden to them in the browser and in the search results.
OK, perfect. We're getting a couple of questions around featured snippets. And one in particular, noticing a lot of featured snippets, obviously hitting the search results, and it's kind of shifting very frequently. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of the logic for areas where you're showing content that and an image in that where the image is from a different site than the content? So it seems like it's not all coming from just one page. It's kind of being pieced together from a couple different sources.
Yeah, I think that kind of came out as I was on vacation last week. So I don't have all of the details around that. But one of the things that I noticed is I see kind of these reports around this specific issue that we're showing a different image. But for the most part, I don't see images that are like completely off topic. So I pinged the featured snippets team on this to kind of get their answer on like why are we doing this? And they're like, well, we think this makes sense for the user. And if you see any cases where we're showing something completely wrong, then obviously that's something they'd want to know about. But for the most part, I haven't seen anything where I'd say this is like completely out of touch with what makes sense for these specific queries.
Mm-hmm. OK. So just don't take any more vacations then, John.
I mean, things are changing all the time. That's I can't avoid that. We make so many changes in search. It's hard for us to keep up internally. So I keep things exciting, I guess.
All right. We have a question here. Do I have to worry about any negative impacts to search rankings while running A/B tests?
Yes and no. So our recommendation is that for A/B tests, you don't treat Googlebot in any specific way. So it might be that Googlebot also sees one of these variations. And if that's the case, then if one of those variations has very different content, then we might pick that content for indexing and use that in the search results as well. So if the A/B variations are very different from an SEO point of view, that might have an effect. If it's a matter of like just tweaking the location, the color, and the placement of different texts that are already on the pages, then obviously from an SEO point of view, that's essentially the same page. It's not that we would say, oh, this site is doing A/B testing, therefore we will demote it in search. It's more a matter of us saying, well, we saw this content this time, so we will index this content and rank it for this content.
Got it. OK, thanks. There's a couple questions coming in around Angular and SEO. Obviously, you'd kind of mentioned that Google is really kind of processing most forms of JavaScript today, which is kind of a marked difference from where it was just a couple of years ago. But just could you give us maybe a couple kind of tips for folks that have clients who are kind of moving in the the Angular direction, or kind of more of the single page app world?
Yeah. So the main things that I've really noticed there is the kind of the focus on URLs, where we've seen a lot of the developers essentially come from a developer background and not from a search background. And they create these fancy Angular sites or single-page apps, but they don't realize that search really needs URLs. So that's not something that we can kind of work around and say, well, we'll figure out a way to kind of work without URLs, because if there's a piece of content on your site, we really, really need to have a URL for that. So that's I think, the main thing there. Also, of course, internal links. And when it comes to links, it's important that we have these A tags in the search in the page, in the rendered view. So not that you're doing something fancy with like a div that does a JavaScript call to the server, and depending on what the server says, it pulls out different content. But really that when we render the page, we see this clear link on the page that we can follow and that we can crawl.
Got it. Thanks. On kind of a clarifying question to that, one thing that I have personally noticed is a pretty significant difference sometimes in the results from a fetch and render in Google Search Console versus like a cached view of a page when we just do like a cache command, in a web browser. Could you talk a little bit about sort of like what we should be viewing as the source of truth for answering the question if Google can truly see our content?
So what I would do there is really look at the search results and do like a site query and some of the keywords and see what actually comes up. I think that's like the ultimate answer, because that's what reflects what users would actually see. Past that, to check individual pages before they're actually indexed, I would use fetch and render. That's the view that Googlebot sees when it does render the page. The thing that you're kind of missing there is everything around the metadata, the invisible part of the page, whether there are links on the page or just divs, those kind of things. But at least you see if the content is renderable or not. The cache view is purely the HTML view. It's not a rendered version. So if you look at the cache page for a single-page app, you'll see kind of this HTML page that has no content on it in the cache view. That's probably what's confusing a lot of people. So for that, I'd use fetch and render and test it from there.
Got it. Can you clarify how Google handles query parameters configured through Search Console? So if we're indicating a parameter that only tracks usage, will Google index both versions of the URL? And I think also just more broadly, as SEOs are typically operating in kind of a high friction channel where we have to rely on developers for implementation. If we're trying to really sort of control crawl efficiencies, is the query parameter exclusions or controlling in Search Console really a viable path?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that you can do with the URL parameter handling tool that helps to improve the crawlability. But there are also lots of things that you can do wrong and break with the parameter handling tool. So I think for the more advanced SEOs, I would definitely take a look at that and see what you can do to kind of bridge over things that might not be so optimal on the existing website. One thing that I recently noticed that some sites weren't kind of watching out for is things like www, non-www, or HTTP, HTTPS variations, where they have the parameter handling set up for one variation, but not for the others. And then you see a weird mix of sometimes crawling too much or sometimes not crawling enough. And the other thing to keep in mind is the parameter handling tool isn't a strong restrict like the robots text file is. So we would still crawl some of these URLs, even if you're telling us in the parameter handling tool that they're not important. So we're essentially trying to make sure that we're not missing anything, so that if you get it wrong, we can perhaps still kind of save it. So if crawling is really a problem, a load on the server that you can't handle, then I would still use a robots text file. But for the most part, parameter handling is a good thing to do. Rel canonicals on pages is a good thing to do. Both of those really help.
Got it. Let's see here. At what point would site speed cause Google algorithms to devalue a page's rankings?
So sites and pages. For the most part, we try to look at pages individually. So we try to avoid the situation that we look at a site overall and say, well, this is a bad site, therefore the pages will be bad. So if we can figure out a way to understand the pages individually, we'll try to do that. That said, sometimes that's not easily possible. So in particular, if something is really new. So if you add new content to your site and we have no idea what your site is about, no background about your site, then it's going to be hard for us to say, well, this is how we should treat this content. Whereas if we already know your site is totally fantastic and we found a new link to a new URL on your site, then we'll go and crawl that really quickly, and we'll try to show that appropriately in the search results, because we kind of assume that your site has generally been really awesome. So probably these new pages will be awesome too.
All right. One question coming about kind of the future of schema and rich snippets. Kind of you had mentioned kind of removing work for the website and or Google in that sense by giving you guys a lot more structured information. Could you kind of help us understand sort of what current or future additions to kind of displays or how you guys are leveraging these search results? Like what can we expect?
I don't have anything to pre-announce there, so nothing really fascinating to add there. But there's still, I think, a bunch of the newer types of rich snippets that are kind of undervalued, I'd say, from a lot of sites. Things like the recipe carousels or the carousels in general, where you can have this really nice image in the search results and different content from your website. Depending on the type of website that you have, I think there's still some really neat things that you can do to kind of stand out above the other sites. And for us, it's usually not so much a matter of changing the rankings for these sites, but changing the snippet and making it so that when users search, they understand this is what this page is about. And it's more that we're kind of guiding more targeted users to your pages rather than just generally more users. So depending on the type of site, I'd really look into the newer types of structured data that have been coming out.
Got it. OK, what about talking algorithm updates? What can you tell us about the Fred update? On the record, you tweeted that you didn't know of such update, but kind of the theory is that Google has kind of called this algorithm update something kind of different than a traditional update.
Yeah, I think as sometimes happens, that tweet was taken a bit out of context. So I don't know the specific tweet I was replying to, but I think it was something like, oh, with the new Fred update, you made these changes, and why is this happening with my site? And I don't know about any Fred updates that's making these specific changes. So that's kind of one thing out there. And I think in general, that's always worth kind of keeping in mind when any site reports on something that we tweet. Sometimes it's worth looking at the tweet and what the response was to kind of understand, is this something general that Google is announcing for all sites, or is this something really kind of specific to this one individual case? In general, I think the Fred update, as it ended up being called, is kind of just like normal updates that we're always doing. It's not the case that this is something specific that we'd want to call out. But some sites were seeing changes in search, and some bloggers were looking for names to put to those changes. So they ended up picking something like Fred. So it's not so much that we'd say this is one specific change. It's more that we always make changes in search. And for some changes, some sites go up and others go down. We can't make them all go up, because then we'd have like 11 results on page 1. We can't make them all go down, because then we'd have fewer results on page 1. But some sites go up, some sites go down. We try to make sure that the relevance in general goes up for users. So when they're searching, they find more relevant content. And there are various things that kind of play into that.
Got it. Well, you just kind of sparked a question in my head, just as kind of search results are changing. Obviously, we're kind of seeing paid sort of conquest, a lot of search results, even to the point, on where it's really taking over the entire fold. Could you talk about any sort of push and pull happening inside of Google, where maybe there's the paid teams kind of looking to appease the shareholders, and there's sort of the kind of algorithmic web quality teams who are kind of maybe keeping that at bay a little bit? Any sort of fun stories or anything to comment on there?
I don't really have much insight into that, but I know they're very, very strong when it comes to keeping the search results relevant. So if anything were to happen, that some teams within Google were to say, well, I want to push this one thing into the search results, and in general, we recognize from our evaluations that actually it's reducing the relevance of the search results, then that's not going to happen, even if it does generate revenue. And sometimes these things kind of take a bit of time to settle down. Sometimes these things are kind of normal changes that roll out, sometimes roll back, sometimes stay. So that's something where, from my point of view, the important part is that we don't just stick to one state and say, this is how it should be, and we never make any changes. Because the web is really dynamic. And if you have a website and you want to stay relevant for people, you really need to respond to things all the time. You need to be always making A/B testing, always kind of double-checking that you're really doing the right thing. You need to question the assumptions that you've been making so far. And that does mean that even our website, our search results change quite a bit from time to time.
Follow-up question to that. On any given day, how many tests are you guys running globally on search results?
Oh gosh, I don't know what the current numbers are there. I think on the How Search Works website, we had something like 10,000 tests a year, something like that. I suspect that number has gone up in the meantime. So pretty much always when you're searching, you're in a number of different tests. And often these are tests that are kind of independent of each other, where maybe some color change or some pixel change is happening, where something is changing here, and then maybe some kind of ranking changes are happening, maybe some personalization changes are happening. And all of this is constantly being tested. So watching the blogs is sometimes interesting, because a lot of these tests don't get picked up because they're just so subtle. But when we look at the numbers, they have a really profound effect on users. So for example, with the mobile-friendly test, initially we tested a bunch of different UI designs to see how users would react. And we tested things like, I don't know, a phone that was crossed out, or a phone that was in green. And we kind of realized that depending on the type of change that we made, users generally figured it out, but it was more a matter of how long did it take for them to figure out. So the phone icon was something where people were probably thinking, oh, this probably calls this website or this business, and I don't want to do that. I want to look at their website. And we would see a significant number of weeks until they actually understood, oh, this means mobile friendly, and I should look at this on my mobile phone.
Interesting. Okay, back to a tactical question. With how frequently sites update and change nowadays, if hreflang is implemented via sitemap and a few of the URLs are redirecting, is there any impact there that we should be concerned about?
So in general, hreflang is something that wouldn't change the ranking of a page. It would just swap out the URLs against the more relevant ones. So that would be something where you will be showing the wrong URL in the results there. But if I can go later.
Got it. Okay. Do you know if Google consumer surveys are being used by Google Search to machine learn what people think about keywords and other semantic topics?
Wow, that's an interesting idea. I don't know. I assume not.
Okay. That came from somebody who's wearing a tinfoil hat, by the way.
Yeah. I find consumer surveys really fascinating because it's so easy to set them up and to run them. The tricky part for me is they don't exist in Switzerland. Like they only run, I think, in the US and in the UK.
Okay, got it. Okay, what's the easiest thing in search that most people overlook?
The easiest thing. Good question. I don't know what the easiest thing that a lot of people overlook. Maybe something simple like title and description meta tags. I think that's something that's kind of underrated at the moment, where like all SEOs are saying, well, I've moved on to these advanced topics, and descriptions are something that kind of happen automatically, or I don't even specify them anymore. But that's something that users still see in the search results.
Mm-hmm. Got it. We had a quick clarifying question as we were talking about kind of testing results. How do you guys measure whether results are sort of more relevant after an update? Like what are the key metrics or KPIs you guys are leveraging?
We look at different things depending kind of on the stage of these changes and the tests that we're doing. So on the one hand, we try to see how users react to algorithm changes in general when we do tests, particularly. On the other hand, we also have kind of a fairly large set of raters that specifically look at the search results where we expect to see changes, and that give us kind of like human information on what they think with regards to this specific change across the websites that we've shown them. So that's something where they're not going to go out and rate individual websites and say this is good, this is bad, but rather for this specific query, we think this variation of the search results is better or worse than the one we had before. So that's something where, on the one hand, we do look at the overall patterns of how people use Google, of course, to see whether or not a change has a positive impact or not. But we also try to take the human touch into that as well. Because what could sometimes happen, for example, is that we make a change, and it pulls up kind of all these clickbaity titles into the search results. And then suddenly everyone is clicking on these results because they're like, oh, this is that one fancy trick that you didn't know, and that one thing that you always wanted to know about the new president. And it looks like it's a good change, but actually all of these results are like terrible. It's like just clickbait that doesn't have any additional value behind it. So we need to have an approach that takes a look at multiple ways of figuring out whether or not the search results are actually more relevant, more useful to users.
Got it. Thanks. What is the most interesting thing to you working with the data sets that you get to work with?
Or
more broadly, what's the most interesting thing about your job?
So what I find fascinating at Google in general is like all of these people that are so much smarter than me that work here, that are doing really kind of neat and interesting things where sometimes I'd say, oh, this is such a kind of a niche topic that, like, why do we even have someone working on this? But on the other hand, when you look at it at Google scale, it's something that totally makes sense. So for example, someone in the Zurich office is working on compression algorithms, ways to kind of improve JPEG compression of images. And we might look at that and say, well, hard disks are cheap, and bandwidth is cheap, and everyone has like fast connections. But when you look at the number of images that are transferred across the web, and you can say, oh, I can save 10% of the bandwidth there, then that's a really big amount. So kind of like these small technical things that when you multiply them with the factor of the internet, they do make a significant difference.
Got it. Could we ever expect a reversal of the not provided decision 6 years later?
I doubt it. I really doubt it. That's something that was made like a long ago, and it's something that from our side makes a lot of sense, because we do kind of want to make sure that users are able to search without having to worry about sites immediately seeing what they were searching for. So I think that's something that's probably going to remain. What might happen is maybe there are easier ways to get kind of the information from Search Console, where you have a better overview of the individual queries, or the type of people that were searching for your content that didn't click, or that did click, or maybe API improvements for those features. I could definitely see that happening, but I don't see the refer with the query coming back.
OK. All right.
Sorry.
Well, I guess we'll just have to keep waiting then, I guess.
I don't think it's a matter of waiting. I think you kind of have to get used to it now.
I don't know, John. I didn't hear a no. Well, let's just do a random question from the audience, but speak up.
Raise your hand.
Tim.
Are the manual testers for quality of sites doing mobile sites now?
Did you hear that?
No, not quite.
We're wondering if the search quality raters you guys are employing, is that specific to desktop only, or are you guys doing that for mobile as well?
We're doing that for both, yeah.
Both. OK, got it. Jeannie?
I was intrigued by a recent conversation on Twitter that I think took a lot of SEOs by surprise. If I can paraphrase it, somebody asked, how would we go after a competitor's keywords that they're ranking on? And your response was something like, why would you do that? So can you explain where you were coming from? Is there something that as SEOs we need to change our mindset on? And how would you keep referencing the 10 to 15% that are true searches? How do we take that more to focus? Is that what you were tying that comment into?
OK, I think I understood the first part, specifically around like ranking for your competitors' keywords. So from my point of view, it's more a matter of like ranking for your competitors' brand names. That probably is kind of futile in the sense that you're not going to rank for someone else's company name, at least like in the first couple positions, because that's really not what users are looking for, unless that company has been bought or sold or is completely out of business. If we show a different company ranking #1 for someone's company name, then we're doing something really wrong. Like something is really broken. Either the other website is broken in the way that we can't crawl and index it properly, but we're kind of showing the user something that they're not willing to actually see. On the other hand, if you're searching for like general information where your competitor is being shown as #1, then that's something that's totally game, I think. That's something where it's totally worthwhile to try to kind of nab that ranking from your competitor. It's not something where like the search results would lose on relevance if we like showed your site instead of the competitors. But if it's really like the brand name or the name of the product, then it's kind of this weird situation that users are explicitly looking for something, and you'd like to be shown instead of that, which is kind of confusing, I think. Obviously, like if you're seeing this on, I don't know, page 2 or lower in the search results, that could make sense, where you're saying, well, I'm like product X, only better, or I'm like product X, but only in green, then that might make sense. But especially the top rankings, I don't see that kind of making sense.
Got it. I have another debate settling question around the existence of a secondary index compared to a primary index. Does the secondary index exist?
Yes.
Yes.
But so what was this? What was the name? The supplemental index.
Yes.
I think back in the day, we called it the supplemental index. And it was something that we treated quite a bit differently in the search results. But nowadays, we have multiple indexes, and they all come into play in the main search results, and they're not treated differently. It's more kind of a technical background thing that's happening on our side with regards to which index an individual URL is in. So it's something we do have multiple indexes. We kind of keep that for technical reasons. But it's not something that site owners would even recognize or see, like what is happening there with regards to those individual indexes. So one very visible variation that used to be the case is the feature phone content, where we had a separate feature phone index. I don't think we even have that nowadays. And most people tend not to have feature phones that access the internet anymore. But that was one example that we had there. I think there's also a video from Matt Cutts that kind of covers the individual indexes that we kind of have there. And the indexes, they change over time. That's something when I talk with the indexing team every year or so, they'll say, oh, well, we have this different setup and this different index set up like this or like that. And I don't even realize that these changes are happening. And I look into the internal testing tools to kind of see what's happening there. So site owners, they generally don't see anything with regards to like how they're actually indexed. It's something that we try to handle on our side.
Got it. So I'm right. Thank you.
Of course.
Eric, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could give us your take on crawl budget optimization and how much time SEO should be spending doing server log analysis and trying to understand where Google is not spending time on your site.
Did you hear that?
No.
OK, so the question was around your perspective on crawl budget optimization for particularly large sites, like imagine something like, I don't know, target.com. So just generally curious, like how much time SEO should be spending doing server log analysis, finding opportunities to really refine your focus.
I'd say for most medium to largish sites, they don't have to worry about crawl budget, because we can pretty much crawl a site fairly well regardless.
Could you define medium to largish?
I don't have any numbers. Yeah, sorry. Especially because the server load is such that nowadays you get servers that can handle load really well. And you might see a spike in users, and you don't see things slow down. So if that's the case, then pretty much we can probably crawl all that we need from the website. For really large sites, when you're talking about sites like Target or Amazon or like these really big e-commerce retailers, that's something where it does end up being something that could play a role, especially when you have complex URL parameter setup with like refers or different affiliate IDs or different variations of catalogization for all of these URLs, where essentially every piece of content is available in 100 different variations or different URLs, then that does kind of explode there. So that's something where, from my point of view, I'd look at this as a general topic every now and then, especially when you're looking at sites fresh, when they're like e-commerce sites where you suspect that they might have a lot of URLs. I definitely spend the time to at least get an overview and see like what order of magnitude am I looking at here? Is everything like duplicated 10 times, which might be kind of OK? Or is everything duplicated 1,000 times, which could be a sign that there is some low-hanging fruit that you can easily clean up by fixing some canonicals or using the URL parameter handling tool to kind of handle that.
Got it. Thank you, sir. I believe that we are at time. Is there any last kind of words of wisdom you would leave to our audience?
Last words of wisdom. I'd say stay curious and stay agile. Keep an eye out on things that are changing. The web is still very new, and it's always worthwhile to really rethink your assumptions and to think about what you could be doing completely differently that maybe you haven't been doing in the past. So instead of saying, my website has been great the last 5 years, and I'm not going to make any changes this year, think about what you need to test to kind of confirm that assumption that things are going great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Let's give a round of applause. I'll turn the camera around so you can see everybody.
Wow. Fantastic. Cool. All right.
All right, John, thank you so much. I know it's 2:46 in the morning where you are, so really appreciate you taking the time. Get some rest, and thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Have a great day, everyone.
That's the big one.